The Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. This podcast is a complement to the Numinous School, an online intuition development course for people who want their self-awareness to serve a greater good. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, and this week my return guest is my very special friend, Michael Phillips. Michael is sharing with us the early part of his spiritual journey growing up as a member of the Communist Party. His family was, as a very small child in the United States in the 30s and 40s, then rolling into the Beat generation of the 50s and finding himself at the foot of a guru and learning meditation in Berkeley in the 60s. I connected with Michael in person at my home in Victoria, BC. Take me back to the early part of your life before Quakers were involved. What was your spiritual upbringing like?
Oh dear. I'm 82.
Well, if you were to give me the highlight reel, did you grow up with a religious household?
No, not as such. I was born to a family, I was born in 1932, and that was, I think, the year that my parents, one after the other, joined the Communist Party. My father he's 40 years older than I am, so when I was born, he was 40. And I was 42, I guess, born in 1932, and my mother is 20 years younger. So that's an interesting thing to begin with. But he was a professor of philosophy at the University of Washington when I was born. When I was born, he wasn't, but by the time I was aware, he was. He was a graduate student when I was born, really writing his dissertation. But they, in the middle of the Depression, they became socialists. He was a cowboy. He grew out of a cowboy family, farmers and cowboys, and my mother was very young. She was just she hadn't completed high school. And never did complete any schooling, but became the most. She was very well educated by the time I came around. By the time I got aware, she read continuously. So I grew up in a communist family, and that meant that when we were driving off somewhere in somebody else's car, either of them learned to drive or got a car. When we were driving off into the country to a picnic or something, I was reported as staring out the window and saying, "Oh, there's a cow. Oh, there's another cow. Oh, there's a cow. There's a whole meeting of cows," which everybody loved because it was an awareness of how much meetings meant to me in my life. That was where people got together. That was where you saw clusters of people, interacting. That was certainly the way meetings were for me. My parents were always off to meetings, and they usually met in union halls and wooden folding chairs, and the kids running around and finally falling asleep under the chairs. That kind of stuff. That was a milieu. That was a part of a milieu.
So how did you make the leap from a childhood that sounds quite secular and intellectual and political to moving to Argenta, which was a Quaker community, and teaching? And Quakers, they are the religious society of friends. Yeah. I can only imagine that this was like stepping into a whole different world.
No, it wasn't stepping. It was easing over a long period of time. The worst crisis in my young adult life what would I have been in my middle 20s, the Khrushchev announced to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, announced and elaborated Stalin's horrible stuff, and the whole structure of the Soviet Union that was completely contrary to what I had been believing and holding myself, identifying myself by. So it was very shocking. It was terrible. I mean, everybody else in the world knew about it except some of us, who thought that all that stuff were lies from the capitalist press, right? They're lying about the Soviet Union, and we knew the truth. It was a very hard thing because that communist milieu was a very intellectually very energetic and very honest, ethically very honest and caring, and so I grew up knowing the score when everybody around me didn't know the score. Not only that, but I couldn't talk to them about it. That we had security problems.
Mm-hmm. And you were in America.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is all in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Khrushchev was later. Yeah, that was in my early 20s. And I had already been easing away from the party, but not much. It was still that's where all my friends were and where all my activities were and so on. So that was a terrible shock. And one of the things that was happening at that time was that the party was falling to pieces because of the FBI. I mean, the attack on the communists was very direct and very, very physical and very strong. So we were not only vilified in the press, and people were horrified as who we were and so on, but we were attacked and we were abused. What's the word?
Intimidated.
Intimidated and the FBI and the un-American committees were after us.
So you experienced a lot of harassment.
A lot of harassment. That was the word. Mm-hmm. We were harassed. Some of us to our death. Mm-hmm. There came a point when the whole Central Committee of the U.S. Party was thrown in jail and stayed there for several years. And my father was fired from his university post without any, contrary to tenure code, contrary to the recommendations of the committee, the university committee, tenure committee, and but it was not only that, but we lost, the family lost a lot of friends, practically overnight, over a period of a few months. People that were used to be good friends, pals all the time, would cross the street so they wouldn't have to say hello to my father or mother, and he lost his job, and so on. So that was an ordeal that put me into. So I took a long time to grow up. Mm-hmm. I took a long time to grow up on account of all that.
So you left America eventually after meeting your wife and
that's right.
Going through your own university studies, but it sounds like the climate was not conducive to your thoughts and your political
That's
bent.
right. But meanwhile, I was thrown on my own. So in my inner life had to change. Being miserable and hateful was not suitable. You couldn't go on that way. You can't go on doing that without wrecking your life. And I was too exuberant to do that. I have had an inner life all my life. I've had an inner life, and I've not been able to to dodge that. It's always there, right? And so I was looking for ways of having an inner life without being a communist, without being a Marxist, without being devoted to that thing. You know, I had identified myself. This is of interest to your questions. I decided that never again would I give my identity to an organization, to an institution, to a body of people, to an ideal, to an idea. I would find what was real in my life and live by it.
So as you were searching for what was real in your life and wanting to live by that, what intrigued you about moving to a religious community that was remote and where it was actually a school that was under the care of the Quakers?
Well, I was not ignorant of the existence of mystical experience. It was even my father led me to that, and he was an absolute materialist, non-believer, rationalist materialist. That's what I keep saying, calling him.
A rationalist materialist?
Rationalist materialist.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that for him, reason was the guide. Reason was the guide.
And proof? Is that what you mean by materialist?
Yeah, yeah, things. And but he was a philosopher. He was a very, very good teacher. He didn't publish anything. He never got beyond assistant professor, I think, in the ranks. But his students fell in love with him. He was really good at it, and he was interested. And he once at some time, several times, he spoke about William. Come on.
Blake?
No. The philosopher, James.
Okay.
William James, and the varieties of mystical experience, a religious experience, varieties of religious experience. That book, and he told me, so several times I knew that the book existed, and there was such a thing as a mystical experience, but I didn't know what that meant. I puzzled about it. I thought about it, and Scoop did have some. Scoop was my father. He did have some ideas about. He did have some. He had some expositions about that. And when I came back after I was in the Army and out of the Army, and I went to live in California. Got involved with the communists there, and that was where all that other stuff happened. And I decided that, and I also got I got a trade and was working at my trade, and I didn't like it, and I decided I would go back to school and get a university degree. So I went back to Seattle to live in my parents' house while I went to university. And I didn't stay there. I didn't stay in the house very long. Moved out on myself, but it was at that time. It was at that time, somewhere along the line, that during those 4 or 5 years, my father gave me a little pamphlet, a little book, about that big, tiny paperback, called, I don't know, Mysticism or The Mystics or something like that, and it gave me a really basic little outline of what mysticism was and how it worked. And I wanted one. I wanted a mystical experience.
You wanted a mystical experience?
Yeah, I really wanted one of those. Boy, that would really be neat. I think I thought of it as a sort of super sexual experience, I mean, related, which in a way it is. And so I had that thing on me, and I read poetry. I read all the beats and the the New Age people, well, not New Age, before the hippies, but the Beats. I read all the literature and poetry and books and so on about that group. I was really hooked up in jazz and music. Bach was becoming very important to me, and I was engaged in theater activities. I worked as a stagehand at a local theater. All those things, right? So I was paying attention to that.
All of those experiences that take you out of the mind and take you into another form of experience that maybe touches on mystical at times. But as you were yearning for that mystical experience, did you think that you were going to achieve that with Quakers, or was...
No. I
Yeah.
didn't know how I was going to achieve it. I didn't know where you went for that. But the Beat movement was there. Jack Kerouac and all that stuff was there, and so I was willing to think about, and it was a psychological experience. It was a psychological event. So the psychology of it was of real interest to me, and I did yearn for it, and so I paid attention to those kinds of things. I didn't pay attention to religious things because I knew that religion was a pile of crap, and I still think it is. Right? I will not admit that I'm a religious person. And I don't like the word spiritual, but I can't find any other for the kind of subconscious or whole consciousness. I think really the holistic consciousness that we aim at, and that was where that began. Well, we made friends with a couple. Oh, because we lived in the same apartment house down the hall from a couple, and Michael and Roberta Nagler, and they had, and Michael had fallen at the feet of a guru, as he had been attending the Thursday evening meetings of Eknath in Berkeley, and said, "This guy's really great. This guy's really great," and it's all about meditation, and meditation does it for you, laying out the substance of mysticism, very simple, very basic, very accessible, very ordinary, accessible, not magical, not distant, not remote or you had a word even in your list of questions that I think it was in there that I will that I reject, having to do with, well, never mind, what it was, esoteric. Esoteric. I reject esoteric as a quality in my life. And it's certainly nothing esoteric about Ishwaran's things. I mean, he was a Hindu, so he talked a lot about he talked out of his most of his pitches were coming out of the Gita, but he was saying it's not a Hindu thing, it's a human thing, and you can do it. And if you're going to seek this, seek it in your own practices, seek it in the practices you're familiar with already. Jesus is a perfectly good word to use, and so on and so on. And not that I cared about that, but I did like the fact that it was ordinary to be mystical. It was ordinary to meditate. It was ordinary to feel these feelings. It's available to anybody, and that turned me on.
That's Michael Phillips in the second part of a conversation we're having about his spiritual journey thus far. The first part of that conversation was the Numinous Podcast, episode 24, Grieving for Susan and Civilization. And by the way, if you'd like to get to know Michael's wife a little bit more, you can meet Lynn Phillips in the Numinous Podcast, episode 20, where we talked about and we shared our sacred poetry, our favorite poets and poems. I love them, and I hope you're enjoying getting to know Michael a bit better. Today's show notes can be found on my website, carmenspagnola.com, CarmenSpagnola. Just click the podcast tab. I want to thank Michael so much for sharing his story with me, and I want to thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I of course really appreciate your review on iTunes, and please share it far and wide so it can reach more seekers just like you, because you never know who needs to hear it right now. And I really want to give a shout out to all my friends in Poland. I can't help but notice, Poland, that you are sharing the show far and wide for sure. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And actually, as I was looking at the statistics about who's listening to the podcast where, I want to send a wave to my listener in China. I have a few there, a handful, hello, and India, and even Barbados. These are very densely populated countries, and isn't it wonderful to know that you're not alone? There's a handful of listeners in each of those countries. I think that's fantastic. Actually, in Barbados, I think there's a few dozen. So thank you very much for tuning in each week. It feels so good to know that there are other soulful seekers out there who enjoy having these kinds of conversations. Thank you for sharing this time with me. If you'd like to keep exploring the great mystery of life with me, you can go to my website, carmenspagnola.com, and click the link for the Numinous School, my online intuition development course, and also, of course, connect with other people who are actively seeking to connect with their soul and develop their intuition. And while you're there, sign up for my monthly email newsletter. You'll instantly receive a meditation download, and you'll get something free from me every month. Until next time, take care.